and have a conversation. Don't be shy. We're gonna just getting warmed up. So microphones coming around to you, and we'll get this underway.
If elected, what do you plan to do about CPS corruption across the U.S.?
Well, corruption across the U.S. So tell me what you mean by CPS.
Child
Oh,
protective
child protection.
services.
Yeah. So listen. So there's a couple issues here. There's the easy stuff, and then there's the hard stuff. The easy stuff is we need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. People say we need new laws. Okay, we can debate new laws. We have fine laws on the books. We're just not enforcing them. So part of my plan to shut down the FBI, it's not just about rooting out political corruption. It's an institution that has failed to even provide security in enforcing the existing laws. You know who's been a lot better at that in the federal government? The U.S. Marshals. So I said I'll shut down the FBI. The 20,000 back office employees reporting to the J. Edgar Hoover building, they can go home and find honest work in the private sector. But 15,000 of them on the front lines are agents, good people doing potentially good work. We're going to move them to the U.S. Marshals. We'll move some of them to the DEA to take on the fentanyl crisis with greater specialization. Even the ones with financial crimes, put them in the Treasury Department where you have the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This is actually how you reorganize that federal government. These aren't slogans to me. When I say shut down the FBI, I really mean we're going to get in there and shut down the FBI, but not because we're going to trade off the enforcement of laws. For example, I think the crisis that we have in the way children are being trafficked in and within and beyond and into this country, but to be much more effective in how we're actually addressing that crisis. And the U.S. Marshals hasn't also been politicized in the same way that the FBI has. This is how we actually drive change. Now, I think that there's a lot else we could talk about. Sealing the border is an important component here. Enforcing the existing laws are a component here. But I think that there's also a separate issue that we need to have the courage to discuss. There's a demand side problem in this country. There's a culture of pornography in this country that I think is something we have to confront. I mean, most kids have actually been, by the age of 12 or so, a majority of kids have been exposed to pornography by the age of 12. We don't talk about this stuff. You're not supposed to talk about it. You sweep it under the rug, pretend like it doesn't exist. If you're going to stand for the truth, you got to speak the truth. Social media is a big source of where perpetrators and child victims actually establish their first point of contact. My view is, for so many reasons, if you're not old enough to smoke an addictive cigarette by the age of 18, or to have an addictive drink of alcohol by the age of 21, you should not be using an addictive social media product by the age of 16 either. Especially when kids are getting Snapchat-driven Percocet laced with fentanyl. That's where they're getting it, on Snapchat. It's where they're actually setting up rendezvous for people who end up becoming child traffickers. These are taboo topics. You're not supposed to say this in public. I think we have to have the courage to confront the truth, the culture of sexualization, perpetuated by the proliferating cancer of social media, especially in youth. To have the courage to say we're actually going to hold the hard line. No social media under the age of 16. We will protect our children. Children should not be exposed to pornography and a culture of hypersexualization at a young age. And by the way, a lot of that's happening even through our own schools in the name of transgender education. No. We have to stand for what's right. So the easy part, I will absolutely get through and do it. That's something the U.S. president can do on his own without asking Congress for permission or forgiveness. Reorganize the federal government, make sure we actually enforce the federal laws on the books, not by going and indicting our political opponents, spending the FBI's resources doing that instead of actually protecting Americans on American soil. That much will get done on day one. But I can't fix the culture alone. I really mean this. I think it's important for all of us to understand this. We fall into this trap of thinking there's going to be some political messiah coming from on high from the White House to save us. It doesn't work that way, guys. I'm not letting you all off the hook that easily either. If we are going to be saved, it is going to be because we save ourselves. There are some things the president can do. I do believe in a youth ban on any form of algorithmic social media. But it's going to take a culture of other leaders. Not just state representatives and legislators too, but parents, coaches, community leaders, stepping up and standing up with the spine too against the culture of hypersexualization that drives some of the underbelly of the beast that is at least 50% of this problem as well. Thank you for that question. I appreciate you. Thank you. Okay, please.
Hi. I first just want to start off with a comment. I loved your debate the other night, and when I'm talking to people about you, the worst thing that they can say is, he sounds too good to be true. And so I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Do you want him to be worse, or, you know? So
I'm Chat GPT.
Yes, I heard that. That's great. The question I have, okay, first, homeschool mom, 7 kids. Love what you're doing about that contest you had.
7 kids homeschooled. Give her a round of applause.
This is my homeschooling sister of 5 kids too. So
nice.
we're gonna take over the world together.
Nice.
But okay, so what I love is about education, it's quality, affordable education, and I love how you talked about the Egyptians when God said, "Here's a promised land. You're gonna go out and secure it." And they look back to Pharaoh to take care of their needs.
Yes.
And so the other night you said something about the $80 cajillion that funds the National Department of Education, and you said something about returning it to the families.
Yes.
Okay, that's a hot issue right now, and I'm trying to figure out how it intersects with the federal level. So my question is going to be, what do you mean by that?
Yep.
Because
Good.
I think ultimately we need to set parents free.
Yes.
And I think anybody, a commodity belongs to the person that pays for it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so I am very cautious that the taxpayers don't own education, that parents own
yes.
education.
Yes. So this is a great question. Let's go into a little more depth. Okay, so the head of the snake in the U.S. failed education system is the U.S. Department of Education. They spend about $80 billion per year on a function that the federal government itself should not be involved with in the first place. That's just a hard fact. Okay? What I want to do is to take that money and to put it in the hands of parents. And I sure, you know, there are real concerns with the mechanics of how this works. So my view is you have to have a school choice option in order to be able to get those funds in the first place. That means every state has to probably have a program like that exists in Iowa to provide mobility, to say parents get to choose where they send their kids to school, regardless of whether or not they're trapped in a given zip code. This is the civil rights issue of our time. There's a second component to this. So I call it school choice on steroids. That's a traditional school choice view. You should have the ability to have economic mobility for your kids. I want to take that to the next level because here's another underbelly of the U.S. education system that isn't discussed, but it is a fact. The schools that spend the most money per student are also the schools that deliver the worst educational outcomes per student. So I want you to track me here for a second. I'll give you a real specific example. Like in New York, some of the worst schools are spending $40,000 per student per year. 10 miles away, you'll have a charter school or private school that spends closer to $12,000 per student per year. That's a $28,000 difference. What I believe is when someone switches from school A to school B, the parent should be able to take half that money, that difference, with them on a per student basis. So if that's $28,000, you get to take half that money with you, $14,000, put it in the kid's account. There's 2 reasons for this. One is it starves the bureaucracy. Part of the poison that comes from the school system, foisted onto our kids, some of it comes from the Department of Education that says, you as a public school don't get this money unless you adopt these toxic racial and gender ideologies. That's why many schools are adopting them. Then they're swimming in bureaucracy, overfunded in a way that doesn't benefit the schools. That's the condition that allows a lot of toxicity, wokeism otherwise, to fester. So now we're really talking. You put, by the way, that money into that kid's account, that's a $250,000 graduation gift when that kid graduates from college, even if it's invested normally. Think about what is a better use of money. Now at the local level, in order to be able to get that, I think a state has to adopt the same provisions in its teachers' contracts for public schools that I will use in the federal government, which is abolishing teachers' unions or collective bargaining protections for the public schools. So now we're talking about public schools competing with private schools, right? Parents have true choice. We have true choice, true mobility, true competition. My view is that if you're going to teach it in the classroom, you better put it on the internet. And if you're unwilling to put it on the internet, you should question whether you're teaching it in the classroom. Now we have true mobility, true transparency, true choice. That's the conditions for a bottom-up revival of civic education. My view is every kid who graduates from high school should have to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a citizen of this country. You got to know something about the country in order to respect and value the country. And all of this is only half the battle, because education begins with the family. Whether or not you're a homeschooler, which I respect immensely, that's a courageous decision to make. And in many cases, the right decision to make. But for those who send their kids to public schools or to private schools, still education begins with the family. Now we have a federal government that is spending more money, taxpayer money, to tell women that they get paid more not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house. So you create the economic incentives, you get what you pay for. We have 25% of kids being born into fatherless homes today that are 8 times more likely to end up in jail, 10 times less likely to graduate from high school. So we're using taxpayer money to subsidize that. So if you take the totality of what I shared with you there, some of that can be led by the U.S. president, some of that has to come bottom up from the states. Right? Back to my earlier point. Each of us has to do our part. The president alone is not going to lead a full national revival. I'm a 10th Amendment absolutist. I believe that which is not reserved to the federal government is reserved respectively to the states and to the people. But you have a good governor in the state. There are other good governors in the state. If we lead a landslide election in 2024, and by the way, that's my job in this race. I do not think this could be another 50.1 election for so many reasons. I think we need a moral mandate to see this through. A Reagan 1980 style revolution in this country. If you look at the way I'm running this campaign, I'm going to some non-traditional places, from the south side of Chicago to Kensington in the middle of Philadelphia. We've been to California already. I think this has to be a landslide moral mandate election. That puts us in a position, both at the federal level and at state and local levels, to drive this national revival bottom up, a multi-ethnic, working class majority that actually delivers on the promises that I'm articulating. But shutting down the Department of Education, setting up the conditions for which that money can flow back to states to then, through their respective choice programs, to be able to put that in the hands of parents, that's going to require states to play ball with that, but it creates the incentives for the states to do it. This is how we create an educational system that goes back to being about the achievement of students rather than employment opportunities for teachers and the unions. And by the way, to admit that education is not just happening in the schools, it starts in the family, and yes, that the nuclear family, both parents in the house, is the best known and greatest known form of governance to man, and we should not pay people to disincentivize them from family formation. That gives you a sense of how I think about it. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. I'm enjoying it. But I have a question that, well, we've been hearing in the news that you had taken money from the liberal Democratic supporter George Soros. I'd like to know if this is true and what you used it for and why.
Yeah. So the short answer to that is, like many things that are showing up in the media as I've risen in the polls, that is flat out false. Like, not an iota of truth to it. Now, I will tell you where they're getting it from. So I've never taken a dime or dollar from George Soros, who I have been one of the most vocal critics of. I think he's been a toxic force on our politics, especially from the last 10 years, where he's been funding these disastrous soft-on-crime prosecutors that are in part responsible for the wave of crimes infesting our cities. But what they're using, and I'm new to politics, so I'm learning how these games are played. You know, when people get threatened, they make up stuff about you. There was a generic scholarship that at the age of 24 I won that was funded not by George Soros, but by another guy who had the last name Soros. It was a family member of Soros who had independent wealth and as an entrepreneur in this country who's dead also. And it's a generic scholarship that hundreds of kids win to go to graduate school, that pay for part of graduate school. I won that at the age of 24 in 2010. I would have had to be a true fool to turn down that scholarship at the age of 24. But the fact of the matter is, if you run for U.S. president, people are going to take that and rake you through the mud over it. I mean, the reality is, and I don't hold this against the other guys either, Donald Trump took a $160 million loan from George Soros shortly before he ran in 2016. Is that disqualifying for him? No, he's a businessman. He does what he does when he's smart. Does that mean George Soros owns him? No. And Ron DeSantis has been criticized because George Soros' investment partners hosted a fundraiser for him in June, and George Soros praised him online. Ron DeSantis doesn't control that either. So I'm not one of these guys that's going to do the virtue signaling thing and pick at the others. But as it relates to my view on this campaign, at first it was kind of irritating when people run these smears, but the more I think about it, we should be skeptical, actually. And we've been taught to be skeptical if we learned something over the last 20 years in this country. But we do have a government that systematically has lied to us. And we've lied about, lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Lied about the need for bailouts in the 2008 financial crisis. Lied about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. Lied about now the Hunter Biden laptop story. Lied about that Nashville shooter manifesto, the transgender shooter who shot 6 people in a Christian school. We still haven't seen the manifesto released. I think lied now about how our money is being spent in Ukraine. Lied about the origin of the COVID pandemic. Lied about what we knew about vaccine mandates. And so when you have a government and an establishment that has systematically lied, I actually now have gotten to a place where I embrace it. I get it. Most people in this country hadn't heard of me 6 months ago. People said, you started at 0% in March. I said, no, I didn't start at 0%. I started at 0.0% in March. And now I'm, at second in many of these national polls, and I'm running to be the next commander-in-chief of this country. And that is a serious position that deserves serious scrutiny for anybody who puts themselves in that position. And at this point, seeing it that way, I embrace it. And I think that is part of the process of having conviction in selecting the next president. But I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm grateful for those who actually ask questions honestly. Thank you for that. Thank you. Please.
Simple question. Do you have a plan to prevent the opposition from stealing the next election?
So, I'm going to be really honest with you. I need to get there. Right, to be in a position. I'm a private citizen. I'm a businessman right now. I've stepped aside from my businesses. Now I'm a candidate. But I'm a private citizen. I have no government authority or control right now. Here's what I believe we need to get to as a destination. All right, and this is one where I said I want to reunite the country. I will stick true to this promise. I will offer a compromise to anybody in the country on this. Okay, a happy way forward. Which is to say, in this country we have single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday, with paper ballots and government-issued ID to match the voter file. That's how elections must be run in this country. That is a hard requirement for faith in our elections. But in return, here's the promise I will make, and I'll ask all of you to keep this with me, because I care about reuniting this country. We will get there. And when we get there, here's my pledge to the other side, and I intend to keep the pledge, which is that once we have those basics, which should not be controversial, then, and only then, but then we are done complaining about election integrity and stolen elections. You give me single-day voting on Election Day with paper ballots and government-issued voter ID matching the voter file, I will keep my end of the bargain, where I will not complain about stolen elections or election integrity. That should be something that moves this nation forward. So on a given day, you can tune into MSNBC or wherever and hear about the threats to our democracy from even asking that question. That you as an election denier are posing a threat to our democracy. I always wonder whose democracy they really mean. Our democracy. But if this is really such a vital issue, we have a simple agreement, hiding in plain sight, of something we can effectuate, a national holiday where everybody votes with a paper ballot and a government-issued ID. That should be something that, if this is really that grave of a risk to our republic, and I do think election integrity is important, and faith in elections is important, this is a solvable problem. So that's where I'll lead us. In order to get us there, I need to be your next president, which poses a bit of a dilemma, because we have an election that's required to put me in that office as your next president, which is why I go back to what I said earlier. This cannot be a 50.1 election. This has to be a landslide. This is not rhetoric, guys. If this is an election where MSNBC and CNN are slowly trotting out the winner the Monday after the Tuesday when we vote. I don't know if we have it in us as a country to withstand the cracking of the thin ice that takes place on the back of that. I am genuinely worried about that. And I just want to use this as an opportunity to speak candidly about why I'm in this race. I got asked this morning, but I had some very positive things to say day before yesterday about Donald Trump on the debate stage. I stand by them. I can't believe people found it eye-opening when I said that. I said he was the greatest president we've had in the 21st century, and I won't apologize for it. That's a fact. So people are like, did he just say that? Yes. George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, it's not even close, right? And so I don't know that that was a head-spinning thing to say, but then you get the question, well, then why are you in this race? I am in this race because I think I am the single person who is going to be able to deliver that landslide election that we need in order to save this country. That is what's on the line. Republican or Democrat, this cannot be a 50.1 election. We are not that far from a breaking point as a country, right? Sometimes that's only easy to see in retrospect. You got to see it in advance to prevent it from happening. This is where we are right now. So I'm not running strictly in the traditional sense as a Republican candidate. I could care less. I'm running as a pro-American candidate. That's what matters. Do you agree with the basic rules of the road? Right? Do you agree on the pursuit of excellence, free speech, open debate, self-governance over aristocracy? Do we agree on the basic rules of the road? I think 80% of this country does, actually. And I think half the 20 are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. We'll teach them and bring that 10% along too. Yeah, maybe we disagree on whether corporate tax rates should be high or low in a given year. Those are details. But on the basic rules of the road, if you don't get it through the media or social media, you get it by being in rooms like this with, and I know most of you in this room probably agree with those ideals, but I challenge you. I believe that most of your neighbors and your classmates and your colleagues share these ideals in common too. I truly believe that. I think you do too, but you're not quite sure about it because we don't feel free to talk about it in the open. Right, so that's how we call the bluff on the manufactured division across the country, is each of us has to start talking openly again. That's why this campaign has been so unfiltered. Right, speaking the truth about the topics you're not supposed to talk about in public, because that's exactly how we unite this country. And as somebody who's 38 years old with fresh legs, who's, I hope, God willing, my best days are still ahead of me. I don't know that. I don't take any day for granted. Every day we wake up is a blessing. I don't take for granted the fact that I got to wake up in Wisconsin, that I'm with you guys here today. But I hope and pray that my best days may still yet be ahead of me. And I think it takes somebody in that position to see a nation whose best days can still as yet be ahead of itself. And I think that is what it's going to take to deliver a landslide, to not just win this election, but then to go back and fix the broken rails of our electoral system, as I will do in my first year in office. Thank you. I appreciate that question. Thank you. Take a couple more.
Welcome to Indiana.
It's good to be here.
We've got a couple questions. What will you do with the illegal crossers? And
Yep.
is it true that they get to $2,200 a month for coming here?
It depends on where they are. I mean, in Chicago, so in the south side of Chicago where I visited, and but this relates to that last point, the last question that I got on about where I was addressing national unity. I have never been in a room that was more in favor of my proposal to use the U.S. military to secure the southern border and seal the Swiss cheese down there than when I was in a nearly all-black room of supposedly mostly Democrats on the south side of Chicago. Because South Shore High School was being turned into an encampment for migrants. They're $7,000 per migrant per month, actually. Right, so it depends on the region and the circumstances, how sanctuary the sanctuary city wants to be. Here's my view on this. And I want to say this in a way that is and approach this in a way that is actually compassionate to our fellow human beings, all of whom we are made in the image of God. Many of those people who crossed that border in the last several years are good people, parents who want a better life for their children, who see a U.S. president, Joe Biden, who effectively is with a wink and a nod saying you can come right on over. And so they see that signal and then they come over in droves. Let's just be really honest for a second. I will be. Maybe if I were in their shoes and I'm a father of my 2 sons who wants a better life for them, maybe I would be doing the same thing. I probably would be. If the president is basically sending me a signal that the laws don't matter in his country. But we are a nation actually founded on the rule of law. And that is why, as the next president, I will make the difficult decision, but stand by it firmly, without apology, that amnesty is not and cannot be an option. We have to take every one of those families and put them back in the country of origin. Here's something I will pledge. I will never break up families as I do it. That could be a deterrent to people coming, because that's the most frightening thing to a father who wants a better life for his sons, to say that if you take him over there, I may never see him again. We will not do that. We will take the entire family unit and move them back to the country of origin. I will end birthright citizenship. I don't think that just because you illegally cross to have an anchor baby in this country, that exempts you from the rules. If you read the 14th Amendment very carefully, I think there's an argument to be made that that's already the current state of affairs under current law. But that's how we'll do it. Amnesty is not an option. Anyone who's in this country illegally has to be returned to their country of origin. And for a small subset of them who have the ability to make, or demonstrated their ability to make, unique contributions to this country and their community as a law-abiding citizen, they can enter through the same process, in the same line, that countless legal immigrants are waiting in to enter this country as well. So that gives you a sense of how I do this. My family has a saying that we live by, which is that you have to be strong enough to protect your kindness. And I think that in the act of being strong, we can't forget our kindness, but in the act of feeling like we're being kind, we cannot lose our strength either. And that is the way I will lead this country. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sir, in the area of foreign policy,
yes.
And your last statement there kind of is a direct lead into my question.
Sure.
I'd like to get your thoughts on a national strategy
Yes.
that feeds the national military strategy.
Good.
The last time we've had a grand strategy, it can be argued, was with the Soviet Union and
Yes.
the containment of communism. We've been all over the map since.
We have no grand strategy in the United States today. We're literally just going through the motions of a largely captured establishment. And I think that this is deeply problematic. This isn't a left-wing or right-wing issue, or it shouldn't be. It certainly is a deep divide within the Republican Party. I think I'm alone on that debate stage, certainly, with the views that I have. I respect the other views. I think the debate is good, but I am firm in where I am. I want to revive Nixon-style realism in our foreign policy. So here's what that means. My top priority is to protect the interests of Americans in the American homeland. That is where it begins. And I'm going to speak some difficult truths here. This is hard to hear, but it's true. We are badly lacking in basic defense capabilities of the homeland. Nuclear defense, non-existent. Cyber defense, non-existent. Super EMP, electromagnetic pulse defense. They could take out the electric grid. Non-existent. Space-based defense capabilities, non-existent. Russia and China have space-based offense and defense capabilities that we don't. Our national defense spending for the last 3 decades, since the fall of the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War, for the last 3 decades, our national defense spending has not really gone towards national defense. It has gone towards fighting somebody else's war and defending somebody else's border. Even today, as we speak, we're sending $200 billion worth of U.S. military aid to defend an invasion across somebody else's border without defending across the armed invasion. It is literally an armed invasion now across our own southern border. So I believe in a modern Monroe Doctrine. I believe in reviving the Washington Doctrine, the George Washington Doctrine, to say that we look after American interests while minimizing foreign entanglements that don't advance American interests. What does this mean, tangibly? End of the war in Ukraine. Not another dime of support. Do a deal that brings that war to an end. What would that deal be? Freeze the current lines of control. A Korean War-style armistice agreement. Make a permanent agreement that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. Those are real wins for Putin. I will admit that. In any good deal, everybody has to get something out of the deal, but we get a greater win in return. The win we get is that I will require Russia to exit its military alliance with China. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest threat to the future continued existence of the United States of America. I know it sounds provocative to say it that way, but I really mean what I say. If we enter serious conflict with the combination of the Russia-China alliance, as I believe Joe Biden is sleepwalking us into potentially right now, with Republicans to aid him in the process, most of the Republican Party standing by him as he does it, I think we face a non-zero risk that the United States of America as we know it could cease to exist. I know that sounds extreme, but this is the truth. We do not have even homeland defense capabilities. We don't even know what Russia's red lines are. And we're waltzing our way into conflict with a nuclear superpower that has nuclear stockpiles greater than ours because we haven't stocked up in a 30-year non-procurement period where Russia and China were arming themselves to the teeth. So that's what I'll do in Ukraine. This deters China from going after Taiwan. Against conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom is like, oh, well, Xi Jinping might feel more bold to get to Taiwan if Vladimir Putin got a piece of Ukraine. No. Xi Jinping feels bolder to go for Taiwan if he knows that Russia's in his camp. But if we pull Russia out of the China alliance, his bet right now, Xi Jinping's bet, is that the U.S. won't want to go to conflict with two different allied nuclear superpowers at the same time, because he correctly observes that they would likely win. But if Russia's no longer in China's camp, now Xi Jinping has to think twice. This is how we deter China from going after Taiwan. I think, you know, the expanded partnership with India is an important part of deterring China too. And I promise I'm not just saying that because my name is Vivek Ramaswamy. Okay? To tell you the truth, part of the relationship with India, the problem is trust, dating back to the Cold War. And if there's anybody who's going to rebuild trust with India in a first term, it better darn well be a guy with my last name. But on a serious note, China gets its oil supplies running through the Indian Ocean and the Andaman Sea and the Malacca Strait. We need a reliable partner there to say that they would, God forbid, in a conflict situation with China, block that. That deters China from going after Taiwan. I think we should turn Taiwan into a porcupine. This is a word used by many, I would say knowledgeable military scholars today. The porcupine strategy for Taiwan. You know, people in left-wing media laughed at me when I said this, but actually many people who are knowledgeable about Taiwanese defense said this was actually a sensible idea. Export the Second Amendment to the island of Taiwan. Put a gun in every Taiwanese household. Train them how to use it. That'll make Xi Jinping think twice before he goes after Taiwan, because the Second Amendment was designed to keep foreign autocrats at bay. And in the United States, it's worked pretty well to do that. You think about Japan, South Korea, the role that they're going to play as well. Declare economic independence from China. We can't depend on our enemy for our modern way of life. The Chinese spy balloon flying over half the United States. If that were a Russian spy balloon, we would have shot it down in an instant and ratcheted up sanctions. We didn't for a Chinese spy balloon because we're scared. Why are we scared? Because we depend on China. We're addicted to China. Addicted to the fentanyl they're pumping across our southern border as part of a one-sided opium war. Addicted to the digital fentanyl they're putting in our kids' hands in the form of social media. Addicted to financial fentanyl in the form of our national debt that we don't have the courage to wean ourselves off of. And so I think this is how I think about foreign policy. Protect the homeland, declare independence from our enemy, deter Chinese aggression, recognize the USSR doesn't exist anymore, but communist China does. And as odd as that might sound, that I have to be the one saying this, I think it will take an outsider to get that job done. Reciting slogans from 1980, memorized by rote, will not work to address the unique solutions that we need to deliver today. And just as Nixon didn't trust Mao, I don't trust Putin. But I do trust other autocrats to follow their self-interest, just as they can trust us to follow ours. And that is how we project, and actually, more importantly than projecting, is creating true American strength while avoiding World War III, which we're far closer to than many in the foreign policy establishment are willing to admit. And the only way I will be a wartime president is indeed if Joe Biden sleepwalks us into one before I walk into the Oval Office. But even then, I have a clear vision of how we'll get out of that. And I hope and pray that we're not there. I will keep us out of it. There's only one war I will declare as the U.S. president, and that is the war on our own shadow government and administrative state here at home. In foreign wars, we're keeping ourselves out of it. Thank you. One more question, and then we'll stay for pictures, and I'll hang out for a while.
What will you do about the U.S. territory that Chinese are buying or want to buy?
Yeah, so we have to take a hard position on this. I will sit across the table from Xi Jinping, and he will know that I mean it. I will prepare myself before I sit across the table from him. We'll already begin the onshoring process to the United States. We will already enter bilateral relationships with Japan, South Korea, India, and elsewhere to be able to move some of those Chinese supply chains, if not to the U.S., which is my first choice, immediately to one of the allied nations. And then I'm going to sit, probably by late 2025, across the table from Xi Jinping and have a serious conversation. Say we're done with it. We're cutting the cord. We are decoupling and declaring full economic independence from China unless you play by the same set of rules. No more forced technology transfers, forced data transfers, forcing companies to do your political bidding around the world. We're done with it. We're out. You know that we can handle it, and I know that you can't, because China's in a tougher spot than we are. But if he's not willing to budge, then we cut the cord and we're out. We will ban China from buying any land in this country. We will ban China from donating to universities in this country. We will ban U.S. businesses from expanding into the Chinese market. We will hold China accountable for unleashing hell on the world with the COVID-19 pandemic, using every financial lever, including but not limited to our national debt, to actually get that done. Because if you don't hold them accountable for last time, there will be a next time, but not on my watch will that happen. But you know what? That's going to be easier for us to do because Xi Jinping's in a tougher spot than we are. If we have the vision to actually open our eyes and see it. The spine to stand up for who we are. His view of us right now. It's actually an interesting place to close this out today is, put yourself in his shoes. What do you see in the United States of America? He says, you all are addicted to me. You don't have it in you to do what you need to do to declare independence for me. So you just try and see how that goes for you. You are addicted to the drugs that I'm pumping across that southern border. You're addicted to the apps that we're putting in your kids' hands. You're addicted to the companies that jump like circus monkeys, asking how high when I say jump. From Larry Fink to to Tim Cook to Jamie Dimon, you name it. American CEOs, your biggest CEOs who you all look up to, tell your kids to grow up and be like, they jump like circus monkeys because I can hold my carrot of access to the Chinese market out as the tool that gets them to dance to my tune. So you just try declaring independence from me because you all can't handle the inconveniences that would produce for you. Well, here's the truth. First of all, it's when you're most willing to make a sacrifice that you don't have to make one at all. A little more Churchill, a little less Chamberlain in our foreign policy. But you can make some sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. And that is this thing we call the United States of America. We are taught to believe that we are a nation in decline. That we're like the version of ancient Rome at the end of the Roman Empire, and maybe even worse than Rome, maybe we're Carthage. China thinks of itself as Rome now. And maybe Taiwan is Sicily. It's the way we see it. It's the way we're taught to see it. But you know what? I don't think we have to be Rome. I don't think we have to be Carthage. I don't think we have to be a nation in decline. The truth is, I think as a nation, we are really just a little young, actually. Going through our own version of adolescence. figuring out who we're really going to be when we grow up. And when you see it that way, at least for me, it takes some of the pressure off, actually. It makes sense. When you go through your adolescence, you go through your identity crisis. I did. You lose your sense of who you are. You lose your self-confidence. You lose your way a little bit. But we are stronger for it on the other side when we get to our adulthood. So no, I don't think we have to be a nation in decline. I think the truth is we can still be a nation in our ascent. Maybe we're even in the early stages of our ascent. Maybe we're not even yet at base camp on our way to that mountaintop. Still that shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan saw. That country where no matter who you are, or where your parents came from, or what your skin color is, or how long your last name is, in my case, that you still get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what, you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And that is what we together will revive to save this great nation. Thank you all for coming this morning. I so appreciate you giving me a chance to introduce myself. But God bless you. God bless your families. And God bless our great country, the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President, everybody is on the line, and just so, this is Mark Meadows, the Chief of Staff, just so we all are aware, on the line is Secretary of State and two other individuals, Jordan and Mr. Germany. With him, you also have the attorneys that represent the President, Kurt and Alex, and Cleta Mitchell, who is not the attorney of record but has been involved, myself, and then the President. So, Mr. President, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, Brett and Ryan and everybody. We appreciate the time and the call. So we've spent a lot of time on this, and if we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear that we won. We won very substantially, Georgia. You even see it by rally size, frankly. We'd be getting 25,000, 30,000 people a rally, and the competition would get less than 100 people, and it never made sense. But we have a number of things. We have at least two or three, anywhere from 250 to 300,000 ballots were dropped mysteriously into the rolls. Much of that had to do with Fulton County, which hasn't been checked. We think that if you check the signatures, a real check of the signatures going back in Fulton County, you'll find at least a couple of 100,000 of forged signatures of people with who have been forged, and we are quite sure that's going to happen. Another tremendous number. We're going to have an accurate number over the next 2 days with certified accountants, but an accurate number will be given, but it's in the 50s of thousands, and that's people that went to vote and they were told they can't vote because they've already been voted for. And it's a very sad thing. They walked out complaining, but the number is large. We'll have it for you, but it's much more than the number of 11,779. That's the current margin is only 11,779. Brad, I think you agree with that, right? That's something I think everyone, at least that's the number that everyone agrees on. But that's the difference in the votes. But we've had hundreds of thousands of ballots that we're able to actually, we'll get you a pretty accurate number. You don't need much of a number because the number that, in theory, I lost by the margin would be 11,779. But you also have substantial numbers of people, thousands and thousands, who went to the voting place on November 3rd, were told they couldn't vote. Were told they couldn't vote because a ballot had been put in on their name. And, that's very, 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 very sad. We had, I believe it's about 4,502 voters who voted, but who weren't on the voter registration list. So it's 4,502 who voted, but they were not on the voter registration roll, which they had to be. You had 18,325 vacant address voters. The address was vacant, and they're not allowed to be counted. That's 18,325. Smaller number, you had 904 who only voted where they had just a PO, a post office box number. And they had a post office box number, and that's not allowed. We had at least 18,000, that's on tape. We had them counted very painstakingly. 18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler. Ruby Freeman. That was the tape that's been shown all over the world that makes everybody look bad. You, me, and everybody else. Where they got number one, they said very clearly, and it's been reported that they said there was a major water main break. Everybody fled the area, and then they came back. Ruby Freeman, her daughter, and a few people. There were no Republican poll watchers. Actually, there were no Democrat poll watchers. I guess they were them. But there were no Democrats either, and there was no law enforcement. Early in the morning, they went to the table with the black robe, the black shield, and they pulled out the votes. Those votes were put there a number of hours before. The table was put there. I think it was, Brad, you would know, it was probably 8 hours or 7 hours before, and then it was stuffed with votes. They weren't in an official voter box. They were in what looked to be suitcases or trunks, suitcases, but they weren't in voter boxes. The minimum number it could be, because we watched it and they watched it certified in slow motion, instant replay, if you can believe it, but it had slow motion and it was magnified many times over. And the minimum it was 18,000 ballots, all for Biden. You had out-of-state voters. They voted in Georgia, but they were from out of state, of 4,925. You had absentee ballot sent to vacant. They were absentee ballots sent to vacant addresses. They had nothing on them about addresses. That's 2,326. And you had drop boxes, which was very bad. You had drop boxes that were picked up. We have photographs and we have affidavits from many people. I don't know if you saw the hearings, but you have drop boxes where the box was picked up and not delivered for 3 days. So all sorts of things could have happened to that box, including, putting in the votes that you wanted. So there are many infractions, and the bottom line is many, many times the 11,779 margin that they said we lost by. We had the state is in turmoil over this, and I know you would like to get to the bottom of it, although I saw you on television today and you said that you found nothing wrong. And I didn't lose the state, Fred. People have been saying that it was the highest vote ever. There was no way. A lot of the political people said that there's no way they beat me, and they beat me. They beat me in the poll. As you know, every single state, we won every state. We won every state house in the country. We held the Senate, which is shocking to people, although we'll see what happens tomorrow or in a few days. And we won the House, but we won every single state house, and we won Congress, which was supposed to lose 15 seats, and they gained, I think, 16 or 17 or something. I think there's now a difference of 5. There was supposed to be a difference substantially more. But politicians in every state, but politicians in Georgia have given affidavits and are going to that that there was no way they beat me in the election, that the people came out. In fact, they were expecting to lose, and they ended up winning by a lot because of the coattails. And they said there's no way that they've done many polls prior to the election. There was no way that they won. Ballots were dropped in massive numbers, and we're trying to get to those numbers, and we will have them. They'll take a period of time, certified, but they're massive numbers and far greater than the 11,779. The other thing, dead people. So dead people voted, and I think the number is in the close to 5,000 people. And they went to obituaries, they went to all sorts of methods to come up with an accurate number, and a minimum is close to about 5,000 voters. The bottom line is when you add it all up, and then you start adding, 300,000 fake ballots, then the other thing they said is in Fulton County and other areas, and this may or may not be true, this just came up this morning, that they are burning their ballots, that they are shredding ballots and removing equipment. They're changing the equipment on the Dominion machines, and then that's not legal. And they supposedly shredded, I think they said 3,000 pounds of ballots, and that just came to us as a report today. And it's a very sad situation. But Brad, if you took the minimum numbers, we're many times above the 11,779, and many of those numbers are certified, or they will be certified, but they are certified. Those are numbers that are there, that exist, and that beat the margin of loss. They beat it, by a lot, and people should be happy to have an accurate count instead of an election where there's turmoil. There's turmoil in Georgia and other places. You're not the only one. We have other states that I believe will be flipping to us very shortly. And but this is something that's as an example. I think in Detroit, and I think there's a good section of your state actually, which we're not sure, so we're not going to report it yet. But in Detroit, we had 139% of the people voted. That's not too good. In Pennsylvania, they had well over 200,000 more votes than they had people voting, and that doesn't play too well. And the legislature there which is Republican, is extremely activist and angry. But there were other things also that were almost as bad as that, but they had, as an example, in Michigan, a tremendous number of dead people that voted. I think, Mark, it was 18,000, some unbelievably high number, much higher than yours. You were in the 4,000 to 5,000 category, and that was checked out laboriously by going through the obituary columns in the newspapers. So I guess with all of it being said, Brad, it's the bottom line. And provisional ballots, again, you'll have to tell me about the provisional ballots, but we have a lot of people that were complaining that they weren't able to vote because they were already voted for. And these are great people. And, they were shell-shocked. I don't know if you call that provisional ballots. In some states, we had a lot of provisional ballot situations where people were given a provisional ballot because when they walked in on November 3rd, they were already voted for. So that's it. We have many times the number of votes necessary to win the state, and we won the state, and we won it very substantially and easily, and we have much of this is they're certified. Far more is certified than we need. But we're getting additional numbers certified too, and we're getting pictures of drop boxes being delivered and delivered late, and delivered 3 days later in some cases. Plus, we have many affidavits to that effect.
So, Mr. President, if I might be able to jump in, and I'll give Brad a chance. Mr. Secretary, obviously there are allegations where we believe that not every vote or fair vote and legal vote was counted. And that's at odds with the representation from the Secretary of State's office. What I'm hopeful for is there some way that we can find some kind of an agreement to look at this a little bit more fully. The president mentioned Fulton County, but in some of these areas where there seems to be a difference of where the facts seem to lead. And so, Mr. Secretary, I was hopeful that, in a spirit of cooperation and compromises, there's something that we can at least have a discussion to look at some of these allegations to find a path forward that's less litigious.
Well, I've listened to what the president has just said. President Trump, we've had several lawsuits, and we've had to respond in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have one. I didn't agree about the 200,000 number that you mentioned, and I could go through that point by point. What we have done is we gave our state senate about 1.5 hours of our time going through the election issue by issue. And then on the State House, the Government Affairs Committee, we gave them about 2.5 hours of our time, going back point by point on all the issues of contention. And then just a few days ago, we met with our U.S. congressmen, Republican congressmen, and we gave them about 2 hours of our time talking about this past election. Going back, primarily what you've talked about here, focused in on primarily, I believe, is the absentee ballot process. I don't believe that you're really questioning the Dominion machines, because we did a hand retally, a 100% retally of all the ballots, and compared that to what the machine said, and it came up with virtually the same result. Then we did the recount, and we got virtually the same result. So I guess we could probably take that off the table. I don't think there's an issue about that. I think what you were saying...
Brad, not that there's not an issue, but because we have a big issue with Dominion and other states, and perhaps in yours, but we haven't felt we needed to go there. And just to maybe put a little different spin on what Mark is saying, Mark Meadows, we'd like to go further, but we don't really need to. We have all the votes we need. We won the state. If you took, these are the most minimal numbers, the numbers that I gave you. Those are numbers that are certified, your absentee ballots sent to vacant addresses, your out-of-state voters, 4,925. When you add them up, it's many times the 11,779 number. So we could go through. We have not gone through your Dominion, so we can't give them blessing. I mean, in other states, we think we found tremendous corruption with Dominion machines, but we'll have to see. But we only lost the state by that number, 11,000 votes, and 779. So with that being said, with just what we have, and with just what we have, we're giving you minimal numbers. We're doing the most conservative numbers possible. We're many times above the margin. And so we don't really have to, Mark, I don't think we have to go through machines, because what's the difference between winning the election by two votes and winning it by 500,000 votes? I think we probably did win it by 500,000. One of the things that happened, Brad, is we have other people coming in now from Alabama and from South Carolina and from other states, and they're saying it's impossible for you to have lost Georgia. We won, in Alabama we set a record, got the highest vote ever. In Georgia we set a record with a massive amount of votes, and they say it's not possible to have lost Georgia. And I could tell you by our rallies. I could tell you by the rally I'm having on Monday night, the place, they already have lines of people standing out front waiting. It's just not possible to have lost Georgia. It's not possible. when I heard it was close, I said, there's no way. But they dropped a lot of votes in there late at night. You know that, Brett. And that's what we are working on very, very stringently. But regardless of those votes, with all of it being said, we lost by essentially 11,000 votes, and we have many more votes already calculated and certified to. So I just don't know, Mark, I don't know what's the purpose. I won't give Dominion a pass because we found too many bad things, but we don't need Dominion or anything else. We have won this election in Georgia based on all of this. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, Brad. Having a correct, the people of Georgia are angry. And these numbers are going to be repeated on Monday night, along with others that we're going to have by that time, which are much more substantial even. And the people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated, because the 2,236 and absentee ballots, they're all exact numbers that were done by accounting firms, law firms, etc. And even if you cut them in half, and cut them in half again, it's more votes than we need.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong. We talked to the congressmen, and they were surprised, but I guess there was a person named Mr. Raynard that came to these meetings and presented data. And he said that there was dead people, I believe it was upward of 5,000. The actual number were two people that were dead that voted. And so that's wrong. That was two.
Well, Cleta, how do you respond to that? You tell me.
What I will say, Mr. Secretary, one of the things that we have requested, and what we said was, and if you read our petition, it said that we took the names and birth years, and we had certain information available to us. We have asked from your office for records that only you have. And so we said there's a universe of people who have the same name and same birth year and died, but we don't have the records that you have. And one of the things that we have been suggesting formally and informally for weeks now is for you to make available to us the records that would be necessary to confirm.
But Cleta, even before you do that, Cleta, even before you do that, and not even including that, that's why I hardly even included that number, although in one state we have a tremendous amount of dead people, so I don't know. I'm sure we do in Georgia too. But is that we're so far ahead of these numbers. Even the phony ballots of Ruby Freeman, known scammer. You know the internet, you know what was trending on the internet? Where's Ruby? Because they thought she'd be in jail. Where's Ruby? It's crazy. It's crazy. That was the minimum number is 18,000 for Ruby, but they think it's probably about 56,000. But the minimum number is 18,000 on the Ruby Freeman night, where she ran back in there when everybody was gone and stuffed. She stuffed the ballot boxes. Let's face it, Brad. They did it in slow motion replay, magnified, right? She stuffed the ballot boxes. They were stuffed like nobody's ever seen them stuffed before. So there's a term for it when it's a machine instead of a ballot box. But she stuffed the machine. She stuffed the ballot. Each ballot went 3 times. They were showing, here's ballot number 1. Here it is a second time, third time, next ballot. Look, Brett, we have a new tape that we're going to release. It's devastating. And by the way, that one event is much more than the 11,000 votes that we're talking about. It's, that one event was a disaster. It's just, but it was something that, it can't be disputed. And again, we have a version that you haven't seen, but it's magnified. It's magnified, and you can see everything. And for some reason, they put it in 3 times each ballot, and I don't know why, but why? I don't know why 3 times. Why not 5 times, right? But yeah, go ahead.
You're talking about the State Farm video, and I think it's extremely unfortunate that Rudy Giuliani or his people, they sliced and diced that video and took it out of context. So the next day we brought in WSB TV and we let them see the full run of tape. And what you'll see, the events that transpired are nowhere near what was projected by,
But where were the poll watchers, Brad? There were no poll watchers there. There were no Democrats or Republicans. There was no security there. It was late in the evening, early in the morning, and there was nobody else in the room. Where were the poll watchers? And why did they say a water main broke, which they did, and which is reported in the newspapers? They said they left. They ran out because of a water main break, and there was no water main. There was nothing. There was no break. There was no water main break. But if you take out everything, where were the Republican poll watchers? Even where were the Democrat poll watchers? Because there were none. And then you say, well, they left their station. If you look at the tape, and this was reviewed by professional police and detectives and other people. When they left in a rush, everybody left in a rush because of the water main, but everybody left in a rush. These people left their station. When they came back, they didn't go to their station. They went to the apron wrapped around the table under which were thousands and thousands of ballots in a box that was not an official or a sealed box. And then they took those and they went back to a different station. So if they would have come back, they would have walked to their station and they would have continued to work. But they couldn't do even that because that's illegal because they had no Republican poll watchers. And remember, her reputation is devastating. She's known all over the internet, Brett. She's known all over. I'm telling you, where's Ruby was one of the hot items on the Ruby. They knew her. Where's Ruby? So, Brad, there can be no justification for that. And I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But that was, and Brad, why did they put the votes in 3 times? They put them in 3 times.
Mr. President, they did not put that. We did an audit of that, and we proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times.
Well, where was everybody else at that late time in the morning? Where was everybody? Where were the Republicans? Where were the security guards? Where were the people that were there just a little while before when everyone ran out of the room? How come we had no security in the room? Why did they run to the bottom of the table? Why did they run there and just open the skirt and rip out the votes? I mean, Brad, and they were sitting there, I think for 5 hours or something like that, the most. But they just all happened to run back and go, Brad. Come on.
Yeah, Mr. President, we'll send you the link from WSB that does.
I don't care about a link. I don't need it. I have a much better link.
I will tell you, I've seen the tape, the full tape. So has Alex. We've watched it. And what we saw and what we've confirmed in the timing is that they made everybody leave. We have sworn affidavits saying that. And then they began to process ballots. And our estimate is that there were roughly 18,000 ballots. We don't know that. If you know that.
There was 18,000 ballots, but they used each one 3 times.
Well, I don't know about that, but I know.
Well, I do because we had ours magnified out. So each one magnified out is.
I've watched the entire thing.
But nobody can make a case for that, Brett. Nobody. I mean, look, you'd have to be a child to think anything other than that. Just a child. I mean, you never Trump or U.S. attorney there.
How many ballots, Mr. Secretary, are you saying that were processed in?
We had GPI thoroughly investigate that.
This is Ryan Germany. We had our law enforcement officers talk to everyone who was there after that event came to light. The GBI was with them as well as FBI agents.
Well, there's no way they could. Then they're incompetent. They're either dishonest or incompetent. Okay, there's only 2 answers: dishonesty or incompetence. There's just no way. Look, there's no way. And on the other thing I said too, there's no way. I mean, there's no way that these things could have been. you know, you have all these different people that voted, but they don't live in Georgia anymore. What was that number, Clay? That was a pretty good number, too. Yeah.
Well, the number who had registered out of state after they moved from Georgia. And so they had a date when they moved from Georgia. They registered to vote out of state, and then they've like 4,500. I don't have that right in front of me.
And then they came back in and they voted.
And voted. Yeah.
No, that was a large number, though. It was in the 20s. And, you know, the point
We've
is...
been going through each of those as well, and those numbers that we got, that Ms. Mitchell was just saying, they're not accurate. Everyone we've been through are people that lived in Georgia, moved to a different state, but then moved back to Georgia legitimately. And in many cases...
Really? How many people do that?
So
You mean they moved out and then they said, ah, the hell with it, I'll move back in? You know, it doesn't sound like a very normal... You mean they moved out, and what, they missed it so much that they wanted to move back in? Yeah, it's like... It's crazy.
Well, and they moved back in years ago. This was not like something just before the election. So there's something about that data that it's just not accurate.
Well, I don't know. All I know is that it is certified, and they moved out of Georgia, and they voted. It didn't say they moved back in, Clayton, did it?
No, but I mean, we're looking at the voter registry. Again, if you have additional records, we've been asking for that. But you haven't shared any of that with us. You just keep saying you've been.
But a lot of it you don't need to be shared. I mean, to be honest, they should share it. They should share it because you want to get to an honest election. I won this election by hundreds of thousands of votes. There's no way I lost Georgia. There's no way. We won by hundreds of thousands of votes. I'm just going by small numbers. When you add them up, they're many times the 11,000. But I won that state by hundreds of thousands of votes. Now, do you think it's possible that they shredded ballots in Fulton County? Because that's what the rumor is. And also that Dominion took out machines. That Dominion is really moving fast to get rid of their machinery. Do you know anything about that? Because that's illegal.
This is Ryan, Germany. No, Dominion has not moved any machinery out of Fulton County. We're having.
Well, but have they moved? Have they moved the inner parts of the machines and replaced them with other parts?
No.
You sure, Ryan?
I'm sure, Mr. President.
And what about the ballots? The shredding of the ballots. Have they been shredding ballots?
No. The only investigation that we have into that, they have not been shredding any ballots. There was an issue in Cobb County where they were doing normal, office shredding, getting rid of old stuff, and we investigated that. But this is stuff from, past elections.
Well, I don't know.
And that's what
it doesn't pass the smell test, because we hear they're shredding thousands and thousands of ballots, and now what they're saying, we're just cleaning up the office. I don't think that plays.
Mr. President, the problem you have with social media, people can say anything.
No, this isn't social media. This is Trump media. It's not social media. It's really not. It's not social media. I don't care about social, but I couldn't care less. Social media is big tech. Big tech is on your side. I don't even know why you have a side, because you should want to have an accurate election, and you're a Republican.
We believe that we do have an accurate election.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have. Not even close. You're off by hundreds of thousands of votes, and just on the small numbers, you're off on these numbers, and these numbers can't be just. Well, why won't? Okay, so you send us into Cobb County for signature verification, right? You send us into Cobb County, which we didn't want to go into. And you said it would be open to the public, and we could have so we had our experts there. They weren't allowed into the room. But we didn't want Cobb County. We wanted Fulton County, and you wouldn't give it to us. Now, why aren't we doing signature, and why can't it be open to the public, and why can't we have professionals do it instead of rank amateurs that will never find anything and don't want to find anything? They don't want to find. They don't want to find anything. Someday you'll tell me the reason why. Because I don't understand your reasoning, but someday you'll tell me the reason why. But why don't you want to find?
Cobb County.
Why don't you want to find?
County.
What?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so why did you do Cobb County? We didn't even we requested Fulton County, not Cobb County.
Well, Mr. President, we did have in our
Cobb
election
County.
contest.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
We chose Cobb County because that was the only county where there's been any evidence submitted that the signature verification was not properly done.
Well, no, but I told you, but we're not saying that. We are
we did say
the
that.
aggrieved. We're the aggrieved party. Fulton County. Look, Stacy, in my opinion, Stacy is as dishonest as they come. She has outplayed you at every heart, at everything. She got you to sign a totally unconstitutional agreement, which is a disastrous agreement. You can't check signatures. You can't do it. I can't imagine you're allowed to do harvesting, I guess, in that agreement. That agreement is a disaster for this country. But she got you somehow to sign that thing, and she's outsmarted you at every step. And I hate to imagine what's going to happen on Monday or Tuesday, but it's very scary to people, where the ballots flow in out of nowhere. It's very scary to people. That consent decree is a disaster. It's a disaster. A very good lawyer who examined it said they've never seen anything like it. And
the harvesting is still illegal in the state of Georgia, and that settlement agreement did not change that.
Well, it's not a settlement agreement. It's a consent decree. It even says consent decree on it, doesn't it? It uses the term consent decree. It doesn't say settlement agreement. It's a consent decree. It's a disaster.
It's a settlement agreement.
What's written on top of it?
Ryan?
I don't have it in front of me, but it was not entered by the court. It's not a court order.
No, it's called. But Ryan, it's called the consent decree. Is that right on the paper? Is that right?
I don't believe so. But I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Whatever. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. Look, here's the problem. We can go through signature verification, and we'll find hundreds of thousands of signatures if you let us do it. And the only way you can do it, as you know, is to go to the past. But you didn't do that in Cobb County. You just looked at one page compared to another. The only way you can do a signature verification is go from the one that signed it on November, whatever, recently, and compare it to 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, or even one. And you'll find that you have many different signatures. But in Fulton, where they dumped ballots, you will find that you have many that aren't even signed, and you have many that are forgeries. Okay? You know that. You know that. You have no doubt about that. And you will be at 11,779 within minutes, because Fulton County is totally corrupt, and so is she totally corrupt. And they're going around playing you and laughing at you behind your back, Brad. Whether you know it or not, they're laughing at you. And you've taken a state that's a Republican state, and you've made it almost impossible for a Republican to win because of cheating, because they cheated like nobody's ever cheated before. And I don't care how long it takes me. We're going to have other states coming forward pretty good. But I won't. This is never given. We have some incredible talent. Said they've never seen anything. Now the problem is they need more time for the big numbers, but they are very substantial numbers. And I think you're going to find that they. By the way, a little information. I think you're going to find that they are shredding ballots because they have to get rid of the ballots because the ballots are unsigned. The ballots are corrupt. And they're brand new, and they don't have seals, and there's a whole thing with the ballots, but the ballots are corrupt. And you're going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them, because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk. But they are shredding ballots, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, and they are removing machinery, and they're moving it as fast as they can. both of which are criminal fines, and you can't let it happen, and you are letting it happen. I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state, and flipping the state is a great testament to our country, because, it's a testament that they can admit to a mistake, or whatever you want to call it, if it was a mistake. I don't know. A lot of people think it wasn't a mistake. It was much more criminal than that. But it's a big problem in Georgia, and it's not a problem that's going away. I mean, it's not a problem that's going away. And we got
President, this is Ryan. We're looking into every one of those things that you mentioned.
Okay,
and our investigators.
But if you find them, you got to say it, Ryan. Look, if they're, let me ask you, Ryan, if they're destroying ballots.
Let me tell you what we are seeing.
Go ahead.
What we're seeing is not at all what you're describing.
Okay.
And these are investigators from our office. These are investigators from GBI, and they're looking and they're good, and that's not what they're seeing. And we'll keep looking. We'll keep looking at all these things.
Well, you better check on the ballots, because they are shredding ballots, Ryan. I'm just telling you, Ryan. They're shredding ballots, and you should look at that very carefully, because that's so illegal. You may not even believe it because it's so bad, but they're shredding ballots because they think we're going to eventually get there, because we'll eventually get into Fulton. It's in my opinion, it's never too late. Little double sound act. So that's the story, fellas. Look, we need only 11,000 votes. We have far more than that as it stands now. We'll have more and more. And do you have provisional ballots at all, Brad? Provisional ballots?
Provisional ballots are allowed, by state law.
Sure, but do you have them? I mean, are they counted, or did you just hold them back because they, in other words, how many provisional ballots do you have in the state?
We'll get you that number.
Because most of them are made out to the name Trump, because these are people that were scammed when they came in, and we have thousands of people that have testified or that want to testify. When they came in, they were proudly going to vote on November 3rd, and they were told, I'm sorry, you've already been voted for, you've already voted. The women, men started screaming, no, I proudly voted till November 3rd. They said, I'm sorry, but you already been voted for, and you have a ballot. And these people are beside themselves. So they went out and they filled in a provisional ballot, putting the name Trump on it. And what about that batch of military ballots that came in, and even though I won the military by a lot, it was 100% Trump. 100% Biden. Do you know about that? A large group of ballots came in. I think it was to Fulton County, and they just happened to be 100% for Trump, for Biden, even though Trump won the military by a lot, a tremendous amount. But these ballots were 100% for Biden. And do you know about that? A very substantial number came in, all for Biden. Does anybody know about it?
I know about it, but we were never.
Okay, Cleta, wait. I'm not asking you, Cleta, honestly. I'm asking Brad. Do you know about the military ballots that we have confirmed now? Do you know about the military ballots that came in that were 100%? 100% for Biden. Do you know about that?
And I don't know about that. I do know that we have, when military ballots come in, it's not just military. It's also military and overseas citizens. The military part of that does generally go Republican. The overseas citizen part of it generally goes very Democrat.
No, but this was
a mix of them.
Yeah, that's okay. But I got like 78% in the military. These ballots were all for this. They didn't tell me overseas. Could be overseas too, but I get votes overseas too, Ryan. In all fairness. No, they came in. A large batch came in, and it was quote 100% for Biden, and that is criminal. That's criminal. Okay, that's another criminal. That's another of the many criminal events. Many criminal events here. I don't know. Look, Brad, I have to find 12,000 votes, and I have them times a lot, and therefore I won the state. That's before we go to the next step, which is in the process of right now, And I watched you this morning, and you said, well, there was no criminality, but I mean, all of this stuff is very dangerous stuff. When you talk about no criminality, I think it's very dangerous for you to say that. I just don't know why you don't want to have the votes counted as they are. Like even you, when you went and did that check, and I was surprised because, I didn't consider the check, and we found a few thousand votes that were against me. I was actually surprised because the way that check was done, all you're doing is recertifying existing votes. And, you were given votes and you just counted them up, and you still found 3,000 that were bad. That was sort of surprising. That came down 3 or 5, I don't know, a lot, still a lot of votes. But you have to go back to check from past years with respect to signatures. And if you check with Fulton County, you'll have hundreds of thousands because they dumped ballots into Fulton County and the other county next to it. So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break. We have that in spades already, or we can keep it going. But that's not fair to the voters of Georgia because they're going to see what happened. And they're going to see what happened. I mean, I'll take on anybody you want with regard to Ruby Freeman and her lovely daughter, a very lovely young lady, I'm sure. But Ruby Freeman, I will take Freeman. I will take on anybody you want. And the minimum, there were 18,000 ballots, but they used them 3 times. So that's, a lot of votes. And that one event, and they were all to Biden, by the way. That's the other thing we didn't say. The Ruby Freeman, one thing I forgot to say, which was the most important. Do you know that every single ballot she did went to Biden? You know that, right? Do you know that, by the way, Brad? Every single ballot that she did through the machine at early in the morning went to Biden. Did you know that, Ryan?
That's not accurate, Mr. President.
Huh. What is accurate?
The numbers that we are showing are accurate.
No, about Ruby Freeman, about early in the morning, Ryan, when the woman took when the whole gang took the stuff out from under the table, right? Do you know do you know who those ballots, do you know who they were made out to? Do you know who they were voting for?
No, not specifically.
Did you ever check?
We did what I described to you earlier.
No. Did you ever check the ballots that were scammed by Ruby Freeman, a known political operative balloteer? Did you ever check who those votes were for?
We've looked into that situation that you described.
No, they were 100% for Biden. 100%. There wasn't a Trump vote in the whole group. Why don't you want to find this, Ryan? What's wrong with you? I heard your lawyer is very difficult, actually, but I'm sure you're a good lawyer. You have a nice last name. But I'm just curious, why do you keep fighting this thing? It just doesn't make sense. We're way over the 17,779, right? We're way over that number. And if you took just Ruby Freeman, we're over that number by five or 6 times when you multiply it out times 3. And every single ballot went to Biden. And you didn't know that, but now you know it. So tell me, Brad, what are we going to do? We won the election, and it's not fair to take it away from us like this. And it's going to be very costly in many ways. And I think you have to say that you're going to re-examine it, and you can re-examine it, but re-examine it with people that want to find answers, not people that don't want to find answers. For instance, I'm hearing Ryan, and he's probably, I'm sure, a great lawyer and everything, but he's making statements about those ballots that he doesn't know. But he's making them with such, he did make them with surety, but now I think he's less sure, because the answer is they all went to Biden. And that alone wins us the election by a lot. You know. So.
Mr. President, you have people that submit information, and we have our people that submit information, and then it comes before the court, and the court then has to make a determination. We have to stand by our numbers. We believe our numbers are right.
Well, why do you say that, though? I don't know. I mean, sure, we can play this game with the courts, but why do you say that? Now, first of all, they don't even assign us a judge. They don't even assign us a judge. But why wouldn't you, hey, Brad, why wouldn't you want to check out Ruby Freeman, and why wouldn't you want to say, hey, if in fact President Trump is right about that, then he wins the state of Georgia. Just that one incident alone, without going through hundreds of thousands of drop ballots. You just say you stick by, I mean, I've been watching you you don't care about anything. Your numbers are right. But your numbers aren't right. They're really wrong. And they're really wrong, Brad. And I know this phone call's going nowhere other than ultimately, look, ultimately I win, okay? Because
Mr. Secretary,
you guys are so wrong, and you've treated the population of Georgia so badly. Between you and your governor, who was down at 21, he was down 21 points, and like a schmuck, I endorsed him and he got elected. But I will tell you, he's a disaster, and I can't imagine. The people are so angry in Georgia. I can't imagine he's ever getting elected again. I'll tell you that much right now. But why wouldn't you want to find the right answer, Brad, instead of keep saying that the numbers are right? Because those numbers are so wrong.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, I mean, one of the things that we have been, Alex can talk about this, we've talked about it, and I don't know whether the information has been conveyed to your office, but I think what the President's saying, what we've been trying to do is to say, look, the court is not acting on our petition. They haven't even assigned a judge. But the people of Georgia and the people of America have a right to know the answers. And you have data and records that we don't have access to. And you keep telling us and making public statements that you've investigated this and, nothing to see here. But we don't know about that. All we know is what you tell us. What I don't understand is why it wouldn't be in everyone's best interest to try to get to the bottom, compare the numbers. If you say, because to try to be able to get to the truth, and that because we don't have any way of confirming what you're telling us. You tell us that you've had an investigation of the State Farm Arena. I don't have any report. I've never seen a report of investigation. I don't know what that is. I've been pretty involved in this. I don't know. And that's just one of 25 categories. And it doesn't even, and as the President said, we haven't even gotten into the Dominion issue. That's not part of our case. It's not part of, we just didn't feel as though we had any way to be able to develop.
No, we do have a way, but I don't want to get into it because we found a way in other states, Slater, excuse me, but we don't need it because we're only down 11,000 votes, so we don't even need it.
Right.
I personally think they're corrupt as hell, but we don't need that because all we have to do, Slater, is find 11,000 plus votes. So we don't need that. I'm not looking to shake up the whole world. We won Georgia easily. We won it by hundreds of thousands of votes, but if you go by basic, simple numbers, we won it easily. So we're not giving Dominion a pass on the record.
No, right, exactly.
But we just don't, we don't need Dominion because we have so many other votes that we don't need to prove it any more than we already have.
Mr. President, Cleta, this is Kurt Hilbert, if I might interject here for a moment. Ryan, I would like to suggest that just 4 categories that have already been mentioned by the president that have actually hard numbers of 24,149 votes that were counted illegally. That in and of itself is sufficient to change the results or place the outcome in doubt. We would like to just sit down with your office, and we can do it through purposes of compromise and settlement just like this phone call, just to deal with that limited category of votes. And if you are able to establish that our numbers are not accurate, then fine. However, we believe that they are accurate. We've had now 3 to 4 separate experts look at these numbers. These numbers are based upon the USPS.
And certified accountants looked at them.
Correct. And this is just based on USPS data and your own Secretary of State data. So that's what we would entreat and ask you to do, to sit down with us in a compromise and settlement proceeding, and actually go through the registered voter IDs and the registrations. And if you can convince us that that 24,149 is inaccurate, then fine. But we tend to believe that that is, obviously more than 11,779. That's sufficient to change the result entirely in and of itself. So what would you say to that, Mr. Germany?
Kurt, I'm happy to. I'll get with our lawyers and we'll set that up. That number is not accurate, and I think we can show you for all the ones we've looked at why it's not. And so if that would be helpful, I'm happy to get with our lawyers and set that up with you guys.
Well, let me ask you, Kurt. Kurt, you think that is an accurate number? That was based on the information given to you by the Secretary of State's Department, right?
That is correct. That information is the minimum, most conservative data based upon the USPS data and the Secretary of State's office data that has been made publicly available. We do not have the internal numbers from the Secretary of State, yet we have asked for it 6 times. I've sent a letter over to Mr. Anulowicz several times requesting this information, and it's been rebuffed every single time. So it stands to reason that if the information is not forthcoming, there's something to hide. That's the problem that we have.
Well, that's not the case. There are things that you guys are entitled to get, and there's things that under law we are not allowed to give out.
Well, you have to. Well, under law, you're not allowed to give faulty election results, okay? You're not allowed to do that, and that's what you've done. This is a faulty election result. And honestly, this should go very fast. You should meet tomorrow because you have a big election coming up, and because of what you've done to the president, the people of Georgia know that this was a scam. And because of what you've done to the president, a lot of people aren't going out to vote. And a lot of Republicans are going to vote negative because they hate what you did to the president. Okay? They hate it. And they're going to vote. And if you would be respected, if this thing could be straightened out before the election. You have a big election coming up on Tuesday. And therefore, I think that it really is important that you meet tomorrow and work out on these numbers. Because I know, Brad, that if you think we're right, I think you're going to say, and I'm not looking to blame anybody. I'm just saying that, under new counts and under new views of the election results, we won the election. It's all, it's very simple. We won the election. As the governor of major states and the surrounding states said, there is no way you lost Georgia. As the Georgia politicians say, there is no way you lost Georgia. Everyone knows I won it by hundreds of thousands of votes. But I'll tell you, it's going to have a big impact on Tuesday if you guys don't get this thing straightened out fast.
Well, Mr. President, this is Mark. Let me just, it sounds like we've got 2 different sides agreeing that we can look at those areas, and I assume that we can do that within the next 24 to 48 hours to go ahead and get that reconciled so that we can look at the 2 claims and making sure that we get the access to the Secretary of State's data to either validate or invalidate the claims that have been made. Is that correct?
So that's not what I said. I'm happy to sit down with, or have our lawyers sit down with Kurt and the lawyers on that side and explain to him, hey, here's, based on what we've looked at so far, here's how we know this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And we
So what you're saying, Ryan? Hold on, let me make sure. So what you're saying is you really don't want to give access to the data. You just want to make another case on why the lawsuit is wrong.
I don't think we can give access to data that's protected by law. But we can sit down with them and say,
but
hey,
you're allowed to have a phony election? You're allowed to have a phony election, right?
No, sir.
When are you going to do the signature counts on? When are you going to do signature verification on Fulton County, which you said you were going to do, and now all of a sudden you're not doing it? When are you doing that?
We are going to do that. We've announced.
To get to this issue of the personal information and privacy issue, is it possible that the Secretary of State could deputize the lawyers for the president so that we could access that information, that private information, without you having any kind of violation?
Well, I don't want to know who it is. You guys can do it very confidentially. You can sign a confidentiality agreement. That's okay. I don't need to know names.
All right,
but we got the information on this stuff that we're talking about. We got all that information from the Secretary of State.
Yeah, so let me recommend, Ryan, if you and Kurt will get together, when we get off of this phone call, if you could get together and work out a plan to address some of what we've got with your attorneys, where we can actually look at the data. For example, Mr. Secretary, I can tell you, you said there was only 2 dead people that would vote. I can promise you there are more than that, and that may be what your investigation shows, but I can promise you there are more than that. But at the same time, I think it's important that we go ahead and move expeditiously to try to do this and resolve it as quickly as we possibly can. And if that's the good next step, hopefully we can finish this phone call and go ahead and agree that the 2 of you will get together immediately.
Well, why don't my lawyers show you where you got the information? It'll show the Secretary of State, and you don't even have to look at any names. We don't want names. We don't care. But we got that information from you. And Stacey Abrams is laughing about, she's going around saying these guys are dumber than a rock. What she's done to this party is unbelievable, I tell you. And I only ran against her once, and that was with a guy named Brian Kemp, and I beat her. And if I didn't run, Brian wouldn't have had even a shot, either in the general or in the primary. He was dead as a doornail. He never thought he had a shot at either one of them. What a schmuck I was. But that's the way it is. That's the way it is. I would like you to, for the attorneys on my side, I'd like you to perhaps meet with Ryan, ideally tomorrow, because I think we should come to a resolution of this before the election. Otherwise, you're going to have people just not voting. They don't want to vote. They hate the state. They hate the governor, and they hate the Secretary of State. I will tell you that right now. And the only people that like you are people that will never vote for you. You know that, Brad, right? They like you. They like you. They can't believe what they found. They want more people like you. So look, can you get together tomorrow? And Brad, we just want the truth. It's simple. And everyone's going to look very good if the truth comes out. It's okay. It takes a little while, but let the truth come out. And the real truth is I won by 400,000 votes, at least. That's the real truth. But we don't need 400,000 votes. We need less than 2,000 votes. And are you guys able to meet tomorrow, Ryan?
I'll get with Chris, the lawyer who's representing us in the case, and see when he can get together with Kurt.
All right.
Ryan will be in touch with the other attorney on this call, Mr. Meadows. Thank you, President Trump, for your time.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
President.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
Tonight, inside the White House, the 187 minutes on January 6th. What did the former president do? What did he not do? Our live coverage, the primetime hearing, starts right now.
This is an ABC News special from 1:10 p.m.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol
until 4:17 p.m.
So go home. We love you. You're very special.
187 minutes. What was happening inside the White House while the U.S. Capitol was under siege? Attack on the Capitol. The investigation. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Our live coverage of tonight's primetime hearing from the January 6th committee. Nearly a year-long investigation, but tonight's hearing will focus on something very specific. We're told the committee will laser in on what former President Trump did not do as rioters were attacking the Capitol. The testimony from several people inside the White House describing the former president watching it all on TV, and they say failing to act. Members of the committee calling it a dereliction of duty. They'll focus on those 187 minutes from the time the former president finished speaking on the ellipse. That was about 1:10 p.m. Eastern, where he urged his supporters to go to the Capitol. Of course, testimony already that the president knew some of those supporters were armed. And then the hours that went by until the former president posted that video at about 4:17 p.m., telling those at the Capitol to go home. We love you. You're very special. Tonight, we will hear in depth where the president was at the White House for more than 3 hours, much of it spent watching his TV. In the room right off the Oval Office. You're looking live at the hearing room. Tonight, members of the committee about to enter.
Committee will be in order.
Let's listen to the Vice Chair, Liz Cheney.
Good evening. Earlier this week, I received a positive COVID diagnosis. Per CDC guidelines, I've received the initial 2 shots and all of the boosters. Thus far, I've been blessed to experience very minimal symptoms. Because I'm still quarantined, I cannot participate in person with my colleagues. I've asked our Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney, to preside over this evening's hearing, including maintaining order in the room and swearing in our witnesses. Over the last month and a half, the Select Committee has told the story of a president who did everything in his power to overturn an election. He lied, he bullied, he betrayed his oath. He tried to destroy our democratic institutions. He summoned a mob to Washington. Afterward, on January 6th, when he knew that the assembled mob was heavily armed and angry, he commanded the mob to go to the Capitol, and he emphatically commanded the heavily armed mob to fight like hell. For the weeks between the November election and January 6th, Donald Trump was a force to be reckoned with. He shrugged off the factuality and legality correct, sober advice of his knowledgeable and sensible advisors. Instead, he recklessly blazed a path of lawlessness and corruption, the cost to which democracy be damned. And then he stopped. For 187 minutes on January 6th, this man of unbridled destructive energy could not be moved, not by his aides, not by his allies, not by the violent chants of rioters or the desperate pleas of those facing down the riot. And more tellingly, Donald Trump ignored and disregarded the desperate pleas of his own family, including Ivanka and Don Jr. Even though he was the only person in the world who could call off the mob he sent to the Capitol, he could not be moved to rise from his dining room table and walk the few steps down the White House hallway into the press briefing room where cameras were anxiously and desperately waiting to carry his message to the armed and violent mob savagely beating and killing law enforcement officers, revenging the Capitol, and hunting down the Vice President and various members of Congress. He could not be moved. This evening, my colleagues, Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois and Ms. Luria of Virginia, will take you inside the White House during those 187 minutes. We also remind you of what was happening at the Capitol minute by minute as the final violent, tragic part of Donald Trump's scheme to cling to power unraveled while he ignored his advisors, stood by and watched it unfold on television. Let me offer a final thought about the Select Committee's work so far. As we've made clear throughout these hearings, our investigation goes forward. We continue to receive new information every day. We continue to hear from witnesses. We will reconvene in September to continue laying out our findings to the American people. But as that work goes forward, a number of facts are clear. There can be no doubt that there was a coordinated, multi-step effort to overturn an election overseen and directed by Donald Trump. There can be no doubt that he commanded a mob he knew was heavily armed, violent, and angry, to march on the Capitol to try to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And he made targets out of his own vice president and the lawmakers gathered to do the people's work. These facts have gone undisputed. And so there needs to be accountability. Accountability under the law. Accountability to the American people. Accountability at every level, from the local precincts in many states where Donald Trump and his allies attacked election workers for just doing their jobs, all the way up to the Oval Office, where Donald Trump embraced the legal advice of insurrectionists that a federal judge has already said was a coup in search of a legal theory. Our democracy withstood the attack on January 6th. If there is no accountability for January 6th, for every part of this scheme, I fear that we will not overcome the ongoing threat to our democracy. There must be stiff consequences for those responsible. Now I'll turn things over to our vice chair to start telling this story.
The chairman, Benny Thompson, remote tonight because of a positive test
Without
from COVID.
objection, the presiding
Now let's listen to the vice chair, Liz Cheney,
to
in the
declare
hearing
the
room.
committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, I announce that the committee has approved the release of the deposition material presented during today's hearing. And let me begin tonight by wishing Chairman Thompson a rapid recovery from COVID. He has expertly led us through 8 hearings so far, and he has brought us to the point we are today. In our initial hearing, the chairman and I described what ultimately became Donald Trump's 7-part plan to overturn the 2020 presidential election, a plan stretching from before Election Day through January 6th. At the close of today's hearing, our 9th, we will have addressed each element of that plan. But in the course of these hearings, we have received new evidence, and new witnesses have bravely stepped forward. Efforts to litigate and overcome immunity and executive privilege claims have been successful, and those continue. Doors have opened, new subpoenas have been issued, and the dam has begun to break. And now, even as we conduct our 9th hearing, we have considerably more to do. We have far more evidence to share with the American people and more to gather. So our committee will spend August pursuing emerging information on multiple fronts before convening further hearings this September. Today, we know far more about the president's plans and actions to overturn the election than almost all members of Congress did when President Trump was impeached on January 13th, 2021, or when he was tried by the Senate in February of that year. 57 of 100 senators voted to convict President Trump at that time, and more than 20 others said they were voting against conviction because the president's term had already expired. At the time, the Republican leader of the United States Senate said this about Donald Trump.
A mob was assaulting the Capitol in his name. These criminals were carrying his banners, hanging his flags, and screaming their loyalty to him. It was obvious that only President Trump could end this. He was the only one.
Leader McConnell reached those conclusions based on what he knew then, without any of the much more detailed evidence you will see today. Lawlessness and violence began at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, before 1 p.m., and continued until well after darkness fell. What exactly was our Commander-in-Chief doing during the hours of violence? Today, we address precisely that issue. Everything you've heard in these hearings thus far will help you understand President Trump's motives during the violence. You already know Donald Trump's goal: to halt or delay Congress's official proceedings to count certified electoral votes. You know that Donald Trump tried to pressure his vice president to illegally reject votes and delay the proceedings. You know he tried to convince state officials and state legislators to flip their electoral votes from Biden to Trump. And you know Donald Trump tried to corrupt our Department of Justice to aid his scheme. But by January 6th, none of that had worked. Only one thing was succeeding on the afternoon of January 6th. Only one thing was achieving President Trump's goal. The angry, armed mob President Trump sent to the Capitol broke through security, invaded the Capitol, and forced the vote counting to stop. That mob was violent and destructive, and many came armed. As you will hear, Secret Service agents protecting the Vice President were exceptionally concerned about his safety and their own. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy was scared, as were others in Congress, even those who themselves helped to provoke the violence. And as you will see today, Donald Trump's own White House counsel, his own White House staff, members of his own family, all implored him to immediately intervene to condemn the violence and instruct his supporters to stand down, leave the Capitol, and disperse. For multiple hours, he would not. Donald Trump would not get on the phone and order the military or law enforcement agencies to help. And for hours, Donald Trump chose not to answer the pleas from Congress, from his own party, and from all across our nation to do what his oath required. He refused to defend our nation and our Constitution. He refused to do what every American president must. In the days after January 6th, almost no one of any political party would defend President Trump's conduct, and no one should do so today. Thank you, and I now recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Article 2 of our Constitution requires that the President swear a very specific oath every 4 years. Every President swears or affirms to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of their ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The President also assumes the constitutional duty to take care that our nation's laws be faithfully executed, and is the Commander-in-Chief of our military. Our hearings have shown the many ways in which President Trump tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power in the days leading up to January 6th. With each step of his plan, he betrayed his oath of office and was derelict in his duty. Tonight, we will further examine President Trump's actions on the day of the attack on the Capitol. Early that afternoon, President Trump instructed tens of thousands of supporters at and near the Ellipse rally, a number of whom he knew were armed with various types of weapons, to march to the Capitol. After telling the crowd to march multiple times, he promised he would be with them and finished his remarks at 1:10 p.m. like this.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue.
By this time, the vice president was in the Capitol. The joint session of Congress to certify Joe Biden's victory was underway, and the Proud Boys and other rioters had stormed through the first barriers and begun the attack. Radio communications from law enforcement informed Secret Service and those in the White House Situation Room of these developments in real time. At the direction of President Trump, thousands more rioters marched from the Ellipse to the Capitol, and they joined the attack. As you will see in great detail tonight, President Trump was being advised by nearly everyone to immediately instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol, disperse, and halt the violence. Virtually everyone told President Trump to condemn the violence in clear and unmistakable terms. And those on Capitol Hill and across the nation begged President Trump to help. But the former president chose not to do what all of those people begged. He refused to tell the mob to leave until 4:17, when he tweeted out a video statement filmed in the Rose Garden, ending with this.
So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
By that time, 2 pipe bombs had been found at locations near the Capitol, including where the vice president-elect was conducting a meeting. Hours of hand-to-hand combat had seriously injured scores of law enforcement officers. The Capitol had been invaded, the electoral count had been halted as members were evacuated. Rioters took the floor of the Senate. They rifled through desks and broke into offices, and they nearly caught up to Vice President Pence. Guns were drawn on the House floor, and a rioter was shot attempting to infiltrate the chamber. We know that a number of rioters intended acts of physical violence against specific elected officials. We know virtually all the rioters were motivated by President Trump's rhetoric that the election had been stolen, and they felt they needed to take their country back. This hearing is principally about what happened inside of the White House that afternoon. From the time when President Trump ended his speech until the moment when he finally told the mob to go home, a span of 187 minutes, more than 3 hours. What you will learn is that President Trump sat in his dining room and watched the attack on television, while his senior-most staff, closest advisors, and family members begged him to do what is expected of any American president. I served proudly for 20 years as an officer in the United States Navy. Veterans of our armed forces know firsthand the leadership that's required in a time of crisis, urgent and decisive action that puts duty and country first. But on January 6th, when lives and our democracy hung in the balance, President Trump refused to act because of his selfish desire to stay in power. And I yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Loria. 1 week after the attack, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy acknowledged the simple truth. President Trump should have acted immediately to stop the violence. During our investigation, General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also remarked on the president's failure to act. Let's hear what they had to say.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump.
Yeah, you're the commander-in-chief. You got an assault going on the Capitol of the United States of America. And there's nothing. No call, nothing, zero.
Like my colleague from Virginia, I'm a veteran. I served in the Air Force, and I serve currently in the Air National Guard. I can tell you that General Milley's reaction to President Trump's conduct is 100% correct, and so was Leader McCarthy's. What explains President Trump's behavior? Why did he not take immediate action in a time of crisis? because President Trump's plan for January 6th was to halt or delay Congress's official proceeding to count the votes. The mob attacked the Capitol the mob attacking the Capitol quickly caused the evacuation of both the House and the Senate. The count ground to an absolute halt and was ultimately delayed for hours. The mob was accomplishing President Trump's purpose, so of course he didn't intervene. Here's what will be clear by the end of this hearing. President Trump did not fail to act during the 187 minutes between leaving the ellipse and telling the mob to go home. He chose not to act. But there were hundreds that day who honored their oaths and put their lives on the line to protect the people inside the Capitol and to safeguard our democracy. Many of them are here tonight with us, and many more are watching from home. As you already know, and we'll see again tonight, their service and sacrifice shines a bright light on President Trump's dishonor and dereliction of duty. I yield to the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kinzinger. I'd like to begin by welcoming our witnesses this evening. Tonight we're joined by Mr. Matthew Pottinger. Mr. Pottinger is a decorated former Marine intelligence officer who served this nation on tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. He served in the Trump White House from the first day of the administration through the early morning hours of January 7th, 2021. The last role in which he served in the White House was as Deputy National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. We're also joined by Sarah Matthews. Ms. Matthews started her career in communications, working on Capitol Hill, serving on the Republican staffs of several House committees. She then worked as Deputy Press Secretary for President Trump's re-election campaign before joining the Trump White House in June of 2020. She served there as Deputy Press Secretary and Special Assistant to the President until the evening of January 6th, 2021. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. You may be seated, and let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you both again for being here tonight. Mr. Pottinger, thank you for your service to the nation as well as for joining us this evening. Can you please briefly explain what your responsibilities were as Deputy National Security Advisor to the President?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. When I started at the White House, I was a senior director for Asia on the National Security Council staff. So that was a job that involved helping coordinate the President's Asia policy. I supported the President when he met or interacted with Asian leaders. Later, 2019, I was promoted to the job of Deputy National Security Advisor. In that role, I was the chairman of the Deputies Committee. That's an NSC meeting of all of the deputy cabinet secretaries. We would settle important matters of national policy related to our national security, and we would also tee up options for the President and for his cabinet members. It was, I felt then, as I do now, that it was a privilege to serve in the White House. I'm also very proud of President Trump's foreign policy accomplishments. We were able to finally compete with China. We were also able to broker peace agreements between Israel and 3 Arab states. I mean, those are some examples of the types of policies that I think made our country safer.
Thank you, Mr. Pottinger. And were you in the White House during the attack on the Capitol on January 6th?
For most of the day, I was in the White House, although when the President was speaking at the rally, I was actually off-site at a scheduled meeting with India's ambassador to the United States. The National Security Council staff was not involved in organizing the security for what was a domestic event, the rally. But I did return to the White House at roughly 2:30 p.m.
Thank you. And I know my colleagues will have additional questions for you about that afternoon. Let me turn now to you, Ms. Matthews. How did you come to join President Trump's White House staff?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. As you outlined, I am a lifelong Republican, and I joined the Trump re-election campaign in June of 2019. I was one of the first communications staffers actually on board for his re-election campaign. And during that time, I traveled all around the country and met Kayleigh McEnany, who was also working on his re-election campaign. I worked there for a year, and I formed a close relationship with Miss McEnany, and she moved over to the White House in April of 2020 to start as White House press secretary, and she brought over a group of campaign staff with her, and so I joined her over at the White House in June of 2020 to start as her deputy.
And were you, Ms. Matthews, at work in the White House on January 6th?
Yes, I was working out of the West Wing that day.
Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia and the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. As you've seen in our prior hearings, President Trump summoned the mob to D.C. on January 6th. Before he went on stage, he knew some of them were armed and prepared for combat. During his speech, he implored them to march to the Capitol, as he had always planned to do. By the time he walked off the stage, his supporters had already breached the outer perimeter of the Capitol at the foot of Capitol Hill. Since our last hearings, we've received new testimony from a security professional working in the White House complex on January 6th, with access to relevant information and responsibility to report to national security officials. This security official told us that the White House was aware of multiple reports of weapons in the crowd that morning. We as a committee are cognizant of the fear of retribution expressed by certain national security witnesses who have come forward to tell the truth. We've therefore taken steps to protect this national security individual's identity. Listen to this clip from their testimony.
What was the consistent message from the people about this idea of the president to walk to the Capitol?
To be completely honest, we were all in a state of shock.
Because why?
Because it's just, one, I think the actual physical feasibility of doing it, and then also we all knew what that implicated and what that meant. That this was no longer a rally, that this was going to move to something else if he physically walked to the Capitol. I don't know if you want to use the word insurrection, coup, whatever. We all knew that this would move from a normal, democratic, public event into something else.
What was driving that sentiment, considering this part of it, the actual breach of the Capitol, hadn't happened yet?
Why were we alarmed?
Right.
The president wanted to lead tens of thousands of people to the Capitol. I think that was enough grounds for us to be alarmed.
Even though he understood many of his supporters were armed, the president was still adamant to go to the Capitol when he got off the stage at the Ellipse. But his Secret Service detail was equally determined to not let him go. That led to a heated argument with the detail that delayed the departure of the motorcade to the White House. We have evidence from multiple sources regarding an angry exchange in the presidential SUV, including testimony we will disclose today from two witnesses who confirmed that a confrontation occurred. The first witness is a former White House employee with national security responsibilities. After seeing the initial violence at the Capitol on TV, the individual went to see Tony Ornato, the deputy chief of staff in his office. Mr. Ornato was there with Bobby Engel, the president's lead Secret Service agent. This employee told us that Mr. Ornato said that the president was, quote, irate when Mr. Engel refused to drive him to the Capitol. Mr. Engel did not refute what Mr. Ornato said. The second witness is retired Sergeant Mark Robinson of the D.C. Police Department, who was assigned to the president's motorcade that day. He sat in the lead vehicle with a Secret Service agent responsible for the motorcade, also called the TS agent. Here's how Sergeant Robinson remembered the exchange.
Was there any description of what was occurring in the car?
No, the only description I received was that the president was upset and that he was adamant about going to the Capitol, and there was a heated discussion about that.
And when you say heated, is that your word or is that the word that was described by the TS agent?
No, word described by the TS agent, meaning that the president was upset, and he was saying there was a heated argument or discussion about going to the Capitol.
About how many times would you say you've been part of that motorcade with the president?
Probably over 100 times.
And in that 100 times, have you ever witnessed another discussion of an argument or heated discussion with the president where the president was contradicting where he was supposed to go or what the Secret Service believed was safe?
No.
Like other witnesses, Sergeant Robinson also testified that he was aware that individuals in the crowd were armed.
Yes, I believe he was on special events channel, and I was monitoring the traffic, and so I could hear some of the units pointing out to individuals that there were individuals along Constitution Avenue that were armed, that were up in the trees, and I can hear the units responding to those individuals. And so there's always a concern when there's a police in the area.
And like other witnesses, Sergeant Robinson told us that the president still wanted to travel to the Capitol, even after returning to the White House.
So at the end of the speech, what was the plan supposed to be?
So at the end of the speech, we do know that while inside the limo, the president was still adamant about going to the Capitol. That's being relayed to me by the TS agent. And so we did part the ellipse and we responded back to the White House. However, the motorcade, the protest motorcade was placed on standby. And so we were told to stand by on West Exec until they confirmed whether or not the president was going to go to the Capitol. And so I may have waited, I would just estimate maybe 45 minutes to an hour, waiting for Secret Service to make that decision.
The motorcade waited at the White House for more than 45 minutes before being released. The committee is also aware that accounts of the angry confrontation in the presidential SUV have circulated widely among the Secret Service since January 6th. Recent disclosures have also caused the committee to subpoena yet further information from the Secret Service, which we've begun to receive and will continue to assess. The committee is also aware that certain Secret Service witnesses have now retained new private counsel. We anticipate further testimony under oath and other new information in the coming weeks. After the Secret Service refused to take President Trump to the Capitol, he returned to the White House. What you see on the screen is a photo of him inside the Oval Office immediately after he returned from the rally, still wearing his overcoat. A White House employee informed the president as soon as he returned to the Oval about the riot at the Capitol. Let me repeat that. Within 15 minutes of leaving the stage, President Trump knew that the Capitol was besieged and under attack. At 1:25, President Trump went to the private dining room off the Oval Office. From 1:25 until 4 o'clock, the president stayed in his dining room. Just to give you a sense of where the dining room is situated in the West Wing, let's take a look at this floor plan. The dining room is connected to the Oval Office by a short hallway. Witnesses told us that on January 6th, President Trump sat in his usual spot, at the head of the table, facing a television hanging on the wall. We know from the employee that the TV was tuned to Fox News all afternoon. Here you can see Fox News on the TV showing coverage of the joint session that was airing that day at 1:25. Other witnesses confirmed that President Trump was in the dining room with the TV on for more than 2.5 hours. There was no official record of what President Trump did while in the dining room. On the screen is the presidential call log from January 6th. As you can see, there's no official record of President Trump receiving or placing a call between 11:06 and 6:54 p.m. As to what the president was doing that afternoon, the presidential daily diary is also silent. It contains no information from the period between 1:21 p.m. and 4:03 p.m. There are also no photos of President Trump during this critical period between 1:21 in the Oval Office and when he went outside to the Rose Garden after 4 o'clock. The chief White House photographer wanted to take pictures because it was, in her words, very important for his archives and for history. But she was told, quote, no photographs. Despite the lack of photos or an official record, we've learned what President Trump was doing while he was watching TV in the dining room. But before we get into that, it's important to understand what he never did that day. Let's watch.
So are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did you ever hear the President
No.
ask for the National
No.
Guard? Did you ever hear the President ask for law enforcement response?
No.
So as somebody who works in the national security space and with the National Security Council, if there were going to be troops present or called up for a rally in Washington, D.C., for example, is that something that you would have been aware of?
Yeah, I would have.
Do you know if he asked anybody to reach out to any of those that we just listed off? National Guard, DOD, FBI, Homeland Security, Secret Service, Mayor Bowser, the Capitol Police, about the situation at the Capitol?
I am not aware of any of those requests. No, sir.
We have confirmed in numerous interviews with senior law enforcement and military leaders, Vice President Pence's staff and D.C. government officials. None of them, not one, heard from President Trump that day. He did not call to issue orders. He did not call to offer assistance. This week, we received additional testimony from yet another witness about why the president didn't make any efforts to quell the attack. The former White House employee with national security responsibilities told us about a conversation with senior advisor Eric Hirschman and Pat Cipollone, the top White House lawyer. This conversation was about a pending call from the Pentagon seeking to coordinate on the response to the attack. Mr. Hirschman turned to Mr. Cipollone and said, the president didn't want to do anything. And so Mr. Cipollone had to take the call himself. So if President Trump wasn't calling law enforcement or military leaders, what did President Trump spend his time doing that afternoon while he first settled into the dining room? He was calling senators to encourage them to delay or object to the certification.